I'm Eric Bricker, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. One thing I can tell you for certain is that no one makes it through life unscathed. At some point, many of us will rely on the trusted counsel of another person to help us navigate difficult times, or to reconcile a troubled past. Whether conventional or unconventional, professional or informal, there are a lot of different forms that helping relationships can take. This podcast is an exploration into what makes these relationships work. Who are the people that help us? How do they help us? What do people need help with? My hope is to uncover as much as I can about this very human phenomenon, and I hope that you'll join me. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. I'm Eric Bricker. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. I am joined by my former psychotherapy intern, Benjamin Taratuta. Ben has his own private practice now. He's doing really well with all of that. And we're here in the same building, the Sanctuary Suites right here in Boca Raton, where there are actually a number of psychotherapists in private practice. I've interviewed several of them on this podcast, but Ben has come to join me, and we're going to spend a little time talking about our relationship, the supervisory relationship, what actually goes on between a psychotherapy intern and a supervisor, and some of the things that we experienced doing that work together along the way. So Ben, thank you so much for coming in here and joining me and being willing to do this as we take a walk down memory lane.
I'm excited. I know, appreciate what you said about me as well. I know when you had mentioned doing this, I thought it'd be real cool, especially like you said, just our relationship as you being that process of supervisor while I was the registered intern to now we joke about me being right down the hall. And so I think it's kind of cool to sit down and just talk about that.
Me too. And I'm really happy for you that you've gotten to this place because you look really happy with what you're doing. And it seems like it's all going very well.
Appreciate it. I know right before we even started, we kind of joked about, both of us remembering the time where you would kind of tell me, as long as you do everything that I tell you to do, one day you might have an office right down the hall. And I took that very literally. I did everything you told me to do, and now I'm down the hall. And so I remember that was kind of the process where, you could tell that that's what I wanted to do. You could tell that was the direction I wanted to take my career. And so to have it play out, I'm really happy with how it turned out. And then also I think, navigating the 2 years as a registered intern, working in an agency, it was definitely a challenge for me. And I don't know that I would have crossed the finish line at the same agency for 2 years if it wasn't for our conversations in here in this exact office. And so I appreciate, even a lot of the insight that you were able to bestow upon me to get to that place.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's a two-way street because I would say that I actually learned a number of things from that relationship, even about myself in the process, and that ultimately the journey belongs to you and you're navigating your own professional pathway. And I have my own ideas about what that's supposed to look like. But we work in this very competitive environment where there are so many people who want to work in private practice in South Florida. You're competing with a lot of other people who want to do the same things. And I have my own ideas about how that works best. And one of my fears with you was that you were so anxious to get out of agency and go into private practice. I think a number of times I actually discouraged you from doing that too quickly. But again, that's me projecting my ideas and my beliefs and in some way my own fears onto you because I was a person who got into private practice much later in my career, even though that was something that I always wanted to do. It just took a long time for me to kind of make that leap of leaving agencies and just being willing to be out here and kind of be my own entity. And I'm just grateful that I did it.
It's funny too, because it was such like a dual process where throughout you and I talking about obviously the professional side of things, like, working 2 years as a registered intern, how to improve clinically, how to get better as a therapist, how to work in an agency. There was also so much of us discussing my own personal stuff that was very parallel, overlapping in terms of why it was difficult for me to work in an agency, just who I am, my personality. And it's interesting because one of the reasons I was so happy to have you as my supervisor is because a lot of the anger management stuff is what I know that you do real well and specialize in. And it was something that I wanted to do as well. And I learned a lot from you. And working in agency life, running anger groups, and then now doing private practice and working a lot with kind of the overlap individuals that you have with anger. It's funny because so many of the things that I talk about, I'm like, Eric would say this to me about how I need to become a better therapist and how I need to work at an agency longer. And it was such an overlap of my own personality showing up, but also me as a professional. And so even when you talk about the safer approach, the removing risk approach of, you stay at an agency a little bit longer and you do more, it was funny because I was so stubborn at the time. And also I was just difficult, listening to the political structure of an agency of, you got to send an email this way and you got to make sure that, you're responding to this in a timely manner and you need to phrase it this way. It was just something that now, obviously, I think I'd handle better. But at the time I was like, no, I'm justified as to why I'm pissed off. And, and all of this is my reasoning. And it was just, it's funny looking back and realizing how much overlap that is with the work that we both do working with individuals that struggle with, anger resolution. And then also just why it was important for me to really take those things to heart and put them into practice working agency life.
It's interesting as you explore the worlds of other people. And in therapy, I always sort of have an expectation that the person's worldview, their circumstances, all of these different things are going to be in many ways different from my own. And so we're always super mindful of not projecting ourselves into somebody else's life circumstances. Supervision, slightly different because we're working within a set structure where there are ethical issues and professional issues that have to be navigated. So there is some sense there are guardrails that are required to keep you within a lane. So there is something that we sort of have to do. But as far as career decisions or how to approach these things or how to approach policies at an organization, it's a reflection of our own individual interpretation of, is this the right fit for me? Or should I be working in a place like this? Or should my career take me elsewhere? And I think in that respect, that kind of transcends a person's ability even to take advice. Because ultimately, we got to kind of figure out where we want to land. You just want to make sure wherever you land, you're equipped for what that is. Especially transitioning from being an intern into something like private practice, because it's very different when you're out here on your own and there's no supervisor or agency structure to go to ask questions to. You have to kind of figure out who your support system's going to be and where your guidance is going to come from. And that can often be very daunting to people who are newer to private practice.
Mm-hmm. I remember a lot of the conversations we had vividly, and it's interesting because now I find myself when other clinicians will talk about approaching licensure, starting private practice, that path, how to do it. And then again, even working with clients in private practice, like pathways, where one of the things that I remember you said to me, and I know I bring this up with you, kind of often, is I think we reached a point where you could kind of tell that my mind was made up. And I think anyone that's ever worked in treatment knows when that happens with a client, where you're like, yeah, this guy's mind is made up. So now I'm just going to try to help him not, crash and burn since he's made up his mind. And one of the things that I remember you telling me was, you had said, well, if it's not on your own accord, if you were to get fired today, who's the first person you would call? Do you have 5 people that you would call in order to see what could be made of just the situation you're in? And I remember sitting there thinking, I guess there was a sense of oversight on my behalf, where I was like, no, I really don't. Like, I've got like maybe 3 or 4 people I could reach out to, and I don't even know what would stem from that. And so I think that was one of the things that I really made an effort towards the end of supervision to start doing, is to really view myself as a professional. I know that was one of the things that we talked about also, was just kind of me struggling with viewing myself as a professional versus just kind of, some regular guy trying to assist people and guide people. And you had kind of said, carry yourself as a professional and make a lot of these professional relationships, where without professional relationships, I know I wouldn't be where I am today. And so I think that was one of the things where I would have that kind of voice, your voice in the back of my head, where I'd be thinking, I need to just increase the amount of people that if I started my own practice would be able to say, yeah, not only do I like that guy, but I think he's a good enough clinician that I would suggest someone go see him. And so I know that was like a bit of a switch that I had, I'd say like maybe like a year and a half into supervision, where I really started looking at myself as just wanting to take things a little bit more seriously as a professional, wanting to really start to hold myself to a standard of not only me feeling good about the work that I'm doing, but enough so that other people, professionals that I come across, would feel that way about me as well. And I remember that really kind of started, you had planted that seed in the conversation that we had about like, listen, I know you think that the work that you're doing is good. I know that you feel that the agency that you work at, what you do is appropriate, but who else would say that, right? How many people, what are the connections that you can make? And I, kind of reached that point where I was trying to do that. And I think that's something that's important that I think there's oversight on. You talk about it being a competitive environment and everything, but I think oftentimes it's important to get to the point of where you're working with other professionals versus viewing it as that competition as well.
I had a martial arts instructor some years back who always used to say, I take my work very seriously, but I don't take myself that seriously. And I think there's a thing about looking at other people who take their identity as a therapist like overly seriously, and just everything has to be some kind of like therapeutic resolution, and they're just like Theratron, where you can't even have a normal conversation with these people like regular people, because at some point you're going to be redirected in the conversation to something therapeutic. I really don't enjoy talking to other professionals like that. And the fact of the matter is, when you lean that heavily into the identity of being a therapist, in my experience, those people aren't usually very good. Mm-hmm. They're not balanced, and they're always trying to prove some point. And that's just my opinion about that. And I think when you see a lot of that and you're not that way, it makes you want to kind of push back against over-identifying with your profession. And in a sense, it creates resistance to taking yourself seriously as a professional. So there's got to be this balance where I do take myself seriously as a professional, or at least I take my work seriously as a professional. Because if I don't take my work seriously, how can I expect anyone else to? And if I don't take my work seriously as a professional and I don't show up with an appropriate professional identity, then no one else is going to either. And those referrals and the partnerships and, the things that we need from a professional community to advance our own businesses, they're not going to be there. And so it's a delicate balance of not wanting to take myself too seriously, but at the same time, take myself and my work seriously enough that other people are going to trust in what I can do.
One of the things that you just sparked my memory on is, I remember one of the first experiences I ever had of therapy, just in general, was a group that you ran. And I think that's what's cool about our relationship too, is it was called a CA, but really a tech, and you were a therapist. And then over time, you became my supervisor. You were no longer at the same agency, but I myself was a therapist. And so it was interesting because you kind of knew the environment and the population that I was working with, which helped. But back to, I know I've shared this with you a lot of times in our conversations, my parents being, Soviet immigrants, therapy wasn't really like a thing growing up. It was like the KGB was after me, so your problems don't exist. It was like, I came here from Russia with, $27. I think you'll be fine. And so therapy was something I never really knew what it was. And so early on, my examples of therapy were through working where we worked as a tech. I'd be able to sit in on group. And when I sat in on your group, I don't remember specifically what was going on, But I remember seeing everyone kind of was looking forward to group with you. Everyone on your caseload was looking forward to every evening, the caseload group. And I remember someone was presenting something, and I remember there was a lot of heavy stuff being discussed. It was like some sort of, trauma assignment or grief assignment, because I know that's what you did a lot there. And I remember there was pockets where the clients and you were able to use humor. And I remember at first I was kind of confused by it, because again, I had never really done therapy myself. I didn't really know what therapy was outside of, reading about or interning or whatever it might be. But the benefit of seeing someone that had been doing therapy for X amount of years to be able to sit there and watch, it was interesting it was the first time I was like, wow, humor can be used here. And so when you talk about taking your profession seriously, but not yourself seriously, that was one of the examples that I always kind of remembered is, to me, you had found that perfect balance where no one was like, oh, this guy's, taking himself too seriously. This guy's kind of, a square or whatever. It's like, all right, this guy, like, he's a funny guy. And also he has all the answers, all the insight you could ever need about working on trauma, working on anger management. And so it was interesting where that was kind of the balance I started looking for. And that's what you talk about, is finding that balance of, okay, he's smart at what he does. He takes his craft seriously, takes the profession seriously. He's here to help people, but he also can joke. He also has his own personality that shows up in the work. And I remember you would say that to me all the time. You would say, find a way to incorporate your personality into the work that you do. Find a way to still let yourself show through. You don't need to be anyone else. You don't need to be this person or that person. Be yourself and still do the work. And so it's funny that you talk about not taking yourself too seriously, because I remember that pretty well.
I think that mentality is the pathway into really doing better work, when you could see where the cross-section of your character and your personality kind of fits into the therapy that you're doing with clients. Sometimes people will debate or talk about who is the best therapist. This environment that we're in can be kind of competitive. In an odd way, there are sort of micro celebrities in this work that we do. It's kind of strange, but there's a big community of behavioral health. So in that sense, and plus with the addition of the social media, in that people become these known quantities. And so it becomes competitive, who's the best and how do you even rank that? And I don't think there is a best therapist. I don't know how you even compare one person to another. I suppose there's a training element or an experience element to that. But I think ultimately the question is, who's the best therapist for you? And that's a matter of personal fit. And how would somebody know that if they couldn't have some access to who you are as a person? Not all the access. I don't want the focus of therapy to be on me. It's not my session. And so my personal life maybe isn't relevant unless there's some overlapping experience I'm having that's relatable to what you're going through. But I think you're going to be more comfortable working with me as an individual if you have some sense of my humanity and who I am as a human being. If we're going to talk about the most serious things that have ever happened to you in your life, you kind of want to know who you're having that conversation with. So the idea that the therapist is supposed to be this completely blank slate, I just don't know if that really works anymore.
It's interesting too, because I know, just looking back, I definitely was a blank slate when I got my first job as a therapist in an agency, working in a treatment center. And I remember even down to the way that I dressed. I kind of Googled like therapist, and it was like a quarter zip and leather loafers. And I was like, all right, like, I guess that's what I'm wearing. And so I wore that. And
hold on a second. Did you really Google like what they're supposed to wear?
Yes and no.
Did you really start outfitting yourself based on Google images? That is amazing.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
What are you, like a foreign exchange student?
Pretty much. Like I said, I never really knew what a therapist was supposed to wear. I was like, what's not professional? What's too professional?
What came up?
It was a lot of quarter zips. It was a lot of like the quarter zip, collared sweatshirts, sweaters. And so I was like, all right, I'll start wearing those. And
so you went out and bought sweaters?
So I went to like, I don't even remember where it must have been like Kohl's, because it's right by the house, like back to school shopping. I bought like a blue, green, brown quarter zip. It was like, all right, this is it. We're firing away. And so I remember that was kind of the fit that I had for a while. And one of the conversations we would have time and time again was how I blend the two. And you said it best, right? It's like, how do you show your personality, but it's not that transference, countertransference, where an individual sees who I am personality wise, but they're not like, oh, this guy's got his own issues with this and that. And so as that happened, there was even like this visual shift, I remember, where I was like, you know what, I don't need to wear quarter zips and leather loafers anymore. And so I started wearing what I normally wear. I like wearing a lot of, thrifted clothing, vintage clothing. And so I know you see me walking around the hallways. I have these, what's been dubbed these like Tony Soprano collared shirts that I wear. And so
who said Tony Soprano collar shirts?
There was a few people over the years that have said this to me. So whether it's an internship site or a job, that I had, people have kind of mentioned that.
My joke on that was always, because I know that you buy the thrifted shirts. It's a joke that I stole from a movie called Midnight Run. So it's like, oh, Ben, looks like things are going really well for you here in private practice. I see you're still spending all your money on clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I'm wearing like a $4.95 Goodwill, special collared shirt. But I think it was a perfect metaphor for just the lessons that I learned in supervision of, okay, I can kind of show that I don't take myself too seriously, that I'm not uptight all the time, and I'm still focusing on being a good clinician.
And that you're probably a good bowler.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Sometimes the bowling donation bag that shows up at Goodwill, I find looks pretty attractive. But so I think it was interesting too, though, because again, I think that was the ultimate sign that I had figured out how to take myself as a professional seriously and still be myself. And I think the population that I was working a lot with there, and I still work with now, was always kind of the treatment resistant, didn't really want to be there population. That's why I find a lot of times the adolescents that I get don't really, it's kind of mom and dad bringing them to therapy. And I think if you show up and I have like the sweater vest on or whatever, whatever Google says a therapist wears, you're gonna be like, I don't want to I don't want to tell this guy all these intimate details.
Well, if you show up that way, you probably are more representative of dad, the principal, the dean at the school they go to, the teacher, someone in this authoritarian position where they might not necessarily have great relationships with that.
Right.
So if you're coming in modeling some other persona of what an adult man could be that you're going to interact with, and your outfits definitely stand out as different, then you're going to get their attention in a way that might be advantageous to the relationship because they might notice something like that.
It helps me figure out how I allow my personality to shine through and do the work that I do, where a few sessions in, I've had adolescents that I work with kind of ask if I'm actually a therapist. I mean, my license is in my office. And so I always think it's kind of funny where I had really gone from this, I need to show up a certain type of way, I have this kind of imposter syndrome, I need to wear these quarter zips, to, I could be myself and I still have all the knowledge that I have and I still have all the insight that I have to be able to help people. And I remember that was, again, a lot of conversations you and I had of that imposter syndrome, where I remember even early on working, in the agency life, you had said to me that I'd be surprised by like the amount of direction and influence that I can have on individuals just by being their therapist. And I had never really conceptualize that until eventually you had said it enough where I'd see it, where I'd kind of walk into a room, they had like their room that they would kind of sit in if they didn't go back to residence, and if they'd be, dicking around or whatever. If I'd walk in, all of a sudden everyone would kind of stop. And that had never been me. I was the one that was always, screwing around. And so to have that shift was interesting. And I remember you really guided me through this process. It was a new one to me to really see this transition for being looked at like this authority figure, being looked at as someone that kind of had influence, which was new to me as well. And I know that tied back to what we would talk. We kind of did a blend of therapy and supervision where we would talk about why that was difficult for me, how, that would bring up certain, doubts and ideas about myself in those moments.
We've talked before about your grandfather, Abba Taratuta.
Yes.
Famous Russian dissident.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, before the fall of the Soviet Union, very active in helping Soviet Jews emigrate from Russia, usually undercover, kind of sneaking them out of the country to America. And this was a man who was interrogated by the KGB all before the fall of the Soviet Union, all before perestroika. And there was a thought that I had along the way as you told me about him and the influence that had on your father and really on your whole family, because it sounds like your mom emigrated from Russia as well. So I wondered if being a dissident who has a penchant for an anti-establishmentarian mentality, if that's actually genetically heritable, or if perhaps maybe that was something that you learned just growing up with this family that frequently made references to the ways in which people in authority often abuse it. Perhaps you were a product of a system like that where you were just raised to think of authority and the conventions of authority as something you wouldn't necessarily want to be a part of, or something that was almost in a way reprehensible to you.
Yeah, I think
that was really slick how I articulated that, right? Did that sound good?
Yeah, it sounded great.
I felt really fucking smart when I said all that.
And I think it was one of the connections that we made, right? Where, we joke about it now, but it's like, all right, if this guy's grandpa is being interrogated by the KGB and they're like, listen, we know you're forging documents and smuggling Jews out of the Soviet Union. Like, we're going to throw you in the gulag. And he's like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. You were like, yeah, of course his grandson's not going to give a shit about responding to the clinical director or the, vice president of business relationships at a treatment. Like, you knew that right away. You're like, oh, okay, this is kind of an uphill battle that I'm fighting with this kid in terms of responding to emails with, hello all, and so, right. And I think that was one of the things where that was a huge piece for me that helped me become a better clinician, where it was like, okay, I'm not fighting the KGB. I can respond to an email from, the VP in Pennsylvania or whatever. And it also helped me just realizing where now in private practice, a lot of the work that I do, I find myself repeating a lot of the phrases you would say to me, where a lot of times justification doesn't really matter. It's the way that you react that matters. And so I think it's interesting where that nature versus nurture argument shows up so much, and learning that about myself has really equipped me to work so well with that population. And so it was an interesting, almost made for TV process, where as I'm learning about myself and my own issues with the anti-establishment, I'm learning how to help others with that. And so, I'm navigating emailing in a timely manner, and then I'm helping people not curse out staff. And so it was a very, we're all in this together, and all the direction comes from the man behind the curtain, Eric Bricker. And so it was a cool process to look back on, where I definitely learned, I learned more about myself than I ever thought I would have learned in the supervision process. And I think that that's huge for any therapist. I don't know what supervision looks like for others. I don't know if it's just talking about clients, if it's just talking about struggles, but I think any therapist, and I know you see this too, any therapist that you would consider one of the better ones, whatever that means, I think really has navigated their own work. And that's why it shows up in the work that they do with clients. And, I appreciate that time period where I was learning a lot about myself. And, like you said, just this kind of genetic disposition I had to be anti-everything. And
I don't know if that's actually a genetically heritable trait, but in our own world where we're having these conversations, why not? But certainly in the culture of the family, I think some of it trickled down.
That was at a time too where I remember I was reading, because my grandpa had kind of wrote these things in a book and published the book. And so I was reading about that and, learning about him, learning about my grandma as well, and just what it was like living in the Soviet Union. And it was kind of that parallel, why certain things were difficult for me, developing that insight and that understanding. And I think that's one of the things that, when working with individuals, private practice, a lot of it is developing understanding. And again, I had never done therapy. So for me, it was like the first time I had really sat and learned, some of these things might not be changeable. Some of these things are just kind of through my family nature, but I'd like to shift some of these things, and I'd like to look at things differently. And I think it helped me a lot, as a person and as a clinician as well.
I remember when I was an intern at an agency called National Recovery Institute. And this is back in 1995. So that was, I think, maybe my second year in graduate school. And so I was looking for clients there to sit down with to do my one-on-ones, because the job I had there didn't always afford me one-on-one time that I could record with different clients. So I was always looking for someone who would allow me to record a process session. And sometimes it was really difficult to find somebody like that. And finally, there was one guy who sat down with me a few times and was willing to make these recordings. So we made our recordings and all that. And it sort of dawned on me somewhere in the process that he was doing this with me, not because he thought he was going to benefit in any way therapeutically from what I was offering. He had available to him a much more experienced therapist in the facility, someone who was seasoned and had been doing the work for a long time and had confidence and was really guiding him. And then there was Eric, the well-intentioned intern. And it dawned on me that he was doing this with me because he was trying to be nice to me, and that he really didn't expect to get anything from the process. And it was really a disappointing experience for me, because I realized in that moment, this is how badly I suck right now. This is how useful I'm not in that moment, that I literally have to find someone who's willing to talk to me. I'm glad that my career is not that way now. I'm grateful for it, but yeah, that was how far I had to come at that moment. It was a really sad realization at that time.
Yeah, I think you've made a significant stride since then. That's not the supervisor that you were to me. So
yeah, hopefully in 30 years something changes. If you don't get better in 30 years, you probably find something else to do.
Yeah, exactly. I remember we had those talks too about, me questioning if I was even making the right decision at times. And again, I appreciate a lot of the guidance that we had, where just learning so much about working with that emotional regulation piece, working with anger and everything. And again, that it was just kind of funny that it was so much of what I also myself was learning as well.
So here's what I've discovered largely through doing this podcast and all these interviews I've done. This is number 36 we're on right here. All these different interviews I've done with other therapists. And some of these people are just extraordinary in their talent levels. And so I'm learning from people all the time, every time I interview somebody, about the stuff that they're doing, specifically if it's in an area that's different from my own, and how exceptional and insightful these people can be. And what occurs to me is that a lot of the most extraordinary and talented people have kind of worked through some similar process themselves and had that experience catapult them into the desire to be a therapist and help other people, where they had such great conviction about what kind of help a person in a particular circumstance would need. And they developed these modalities. They learned these modalities and developed the skills around them to help people, and are just so exceptional with it that even hearing them talk about it leaves me in awe at times of just how talented these people are. And that's without ever having seen them actually work, and knowing that I probably never will see that. But talking to them about it for a length of time and being one of their peers and listening to them, you could sort of understand, like, this is why you do things the way that you do. And this is why you see clients with this particular problem the way that you do. And I just find that really incredible. I'm grateful that at this point in my career, I could still appreciate the work of other people that's different from mine. And I think for you, it was really about learning all of the skills, but also developing a way to do this that was in line with your own personality and your own individuality. Because if it didn't make sense to you, I don't think you were ever going to be a guy who could just kind of phone it in. If it didn't make sense to you, it would never come across as authentic, and it probably wouldn't work for you, because it's some way, I think your lack of commitment to it would probably shine through. So you were a guy who really had to figure out a way to make this make sense to him, to buy into it. And once you had that, it would be easier to get buy-in from clients, because they would see that in you, that you had conviction about what you were doing, because you're not a person who could or would sell an idea or a methodology that you didn't really believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few moments that kind of pop up even when, you talk about that. One of them being, any treatment center that you work at has their own version of like rounds where you discuss clients. And that was one of the things that I remember I would come in often and talk to you about, where like, I hated the process. It was like, everyone's like, oh, try this, try that. And exactly like you said, when my mind's made up, that's it. If I don't believe in it, if I don't have an understanding as to why it makes sense, you're likely I'm going to mail it in. And it's obvious that I'm mailing it in. Even when I came in today, I was like, oh, I'm just going to run and grab like a Tylenol from my office. She's like, oh, are we getting cranky Ben on the podcast? I said, no, it's cold out and, I didn't sleep all that great. And so it was funny because it's obvious when what I'm thinking. It's obvious when something is bothering me. It's obvious when I'm not totally gung-ho about something. And so one of the things that I remember you would talk about often is just like learning how to be able to sell that in the professional setting, where it doesn't matter if you're not bought in, like this is just the way that it works. But also I think even behind you, and what I would see every time I would sit here for supervision, is all these certifications and specializations regarding anger management. And so I think one of the things that you really helped me a lot with was just gaining that understanding. I mean, I did the same trainings that you did. I did a lot of the same courses and certifications that you had done to develop that understanding. I just think it was, helpful is not even the right, it's the only reason why I'm so successful at it now is because of the experience that you had, that you were able to bestow upon me, where you had helped me develop so much insight, so much understanding as to putting it all together and seeing it for myself. And so exactly what you talk about is learning how to do it yourself. You had said something to me one time where you had said a lot of the things that you have struggled with in your lifetime, a lot of things that have led you to where you are, a lot of the issues that you've had that you've kind of worked through and developed understanding, that becomes the superpower when you work with individuals that way. And so, I still hear the exact way that you said it, where like I find that myself when I work with a lot of these kids that have experienced trauma as child or experienced a lot of just difficulty communicating what they're thinking. And it's always impressive where they don't need to know why I know what they're going through. They don't need to know the specific reasons as to why I'm able to kind of translate what's going on in their head. But it's interesting where so much of that came from the work that we did, of just me finally getting some of those missing pieces, finally getting some of those parts that were left without light shined on, as to making sense of these things, as to why I'm able to, feel that I really did learn a lot in that process and help these people out now with struggling as well with a lot of similar things.
Yeah, I'm glad that has worked out, and it sounds as though you really are in a very different place with those things. And it's funny how these things that maybe could get in the way of our success ultimately become the vehicles that help us to become more successful and useful. And I think that's really the process of becoming like a good therapist. And often those are the moments and the experiences that sort of press you and stretch you, and that you struggle through, and that there's internal angst and cognitive dissonance, some kind of disconnection between what you're doing and how you feel, and having to kind of stretch and pull and look at all those different things. And hopefully in that process, getting resolution and a comfort level with ourselves and the process, recognizing sometimes there are limitations that we have, sometimes there are limitations that the clients have, and sometimes there's just limitations that the world has, But it's cool, man. Like, this has really worked out for you, and you're in a great place, and you're doing everything you wanted to do. And I have to imagine that's very gratifying for you.
Yeah, it definitely is. There's a lot of times where I kind of sit back and appreciate where I'm at. I think one of the things that, and I know I've said this before, but I think I don't know that I would be where I'm at if it wasn't for the supervision relationship that we had. And to me, it makes it even more special that I am down the hall, because this is kind of, it's like an isolating profession where, you're at the mercy of the client. You see the client, you walk out, the next one's in the lobby, you go. It's through the week until the evening time where you're kind of just done, tired, and don't really want to make time to do anything but kind of go home and sit down for a little bit. There's times where, you and me and even the other professionals that are here, we don't have the ability to kind of connect and speak. But in the times that you and I do get together, in the times where, we'll both see each other and realize that our client's not coming to come back here, see what you're working on. I know, we'll kind of catch up. It's been nice just still having that relationship with you as well, where, it's such a pivotal part of, again, not only helping me remain employed at the agency and get licensed, but also really find kind of that population I work well with, which I think you had always said to me, where it's like, find a population that respects you, find a population you enjoy working with, and really make that your thing. And so I know, again, we joke, but I really did listen. Well, not everything, but I tried to listen to everything you had suggested I do. And I've reached a point where gratitude's something that I try to practice every day, of just kind of the appreciation of being in this office and enjoying my day to day and doing the work and working with a population I really enjoy working with. I remember that was something else we had spoken about, me leaving the agency, is they were giving me clients that I enjoyed working with. And I had that fear of, well, will I find that when I leave? Will I find people that I enjoy working with? I know you've joked with me out in the waiting lobby where you're like, this looks like a Ben Taratuta client walking in. And it's, a kid, disheveled, sweats, does not want to be here. And I'm like, yeah, that's my guy. I love working with that guy. And to me, that's always funny. You just knowing when they walk in that it's going to be my client.
Well, what's great about that for you, for better or for worse, in 2025's America, there is no shortage of disenfranchised, frustrated, angry young men who do not like the world around them and need a lot of help navigating all of that. And so I think that you've chosen a path and a population that really needs what you have to offer them. And they are discriminant about who they take suggestions from, because these guys are not big fans of authority figures generally. So you've found your lane.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it will evolve over time and expand into different things. And, some of these guys will get into relationships at some point, and then maybe you'll be doing couples, Maybe you'll be working with angry couples and helping them figure it out. And who knows?
Right. Yeah. I wonder at what point are they like, I think that's when I try to find a career change, when like they're like, this guy's old, I don't want to meet with him. I think that's when I'm like, I've reached, this is my time to retire. Kind of like every athlete's like, the game has evolved. I think when people are like, who's this guy think he is? That's maybe either, to your point, I try to shift gears, or I just say, maybe I'll, I don't know, open up an ice cream shop or something, or do something different.
I don't know, dude. I think there's a lot of tread on the tires. And my hope is that you get to pivot in lots of different directions in your career. And you'll be surprised as you move forward in this thing, how you think about certain things different and how different things attract you. But you've gotten off to a really great start in the private practice, and you've zeroed in on your population, and what you're doing with them is effective. And by virtue of that, you're getting more opportunities because people are talking positively about you. So everything is working, and I'm really happy for you for that. I'm excited about the way it worked out, and worked out exactly the way it needed to for you.
Yeah.
I want to say this about it too. As much as you've been very generous with your compliments to me, I want to say also the relationship equally meant a lot to me, because ultimately there are a lot of people who are qualified clinical supervisors, and you could have gone to any of these people. They would have been happy to work with you, but you selected me specifically, and you reached out to me specifically and really made the effort to bridge this connection. And when someone thinks enough of me to want to do that, it's personally meaningful. And it was meaningful that you did, and it was meaningful that you allowed me this place in your life to provide you with guidance, because I know that you're very selective about whom you take guidance from. It wasn't going to be just anybody. So for whatever reason, you were here. And I knew that about you, that you were very serious about this, because you probably thought through a number of other people that you could have called for this. And the fact that you reached out to me, one, it speaks to your excellent judgment, discriminating taste, but two, the fact that, you thought enough of me to want to do that. And it's a high compliment.
I think it's well-deserved also. And, it's funny too, because I remember during our supervision was kind of the start of the podcast too. And so I remember like, I kind of threw the joke at like, oh, maybe I'll be a guest. And you kind of gave me like yeah. And like, and to be now, here, it's an interesting evolution. And I think, again, it really speaks. To me, you set a high standard of what it is to work with, like you said, someone that really difficult to take direction, someone that's kind of antisocial, someone that really, has like their own views of things. And I appreciate also you being able to push me at times where you kind of knew it was showing up in our relationship. We're like maybe I need to tell this guy to shut the fuck up a few times, and you would say that to me sometimes. And so I appreciate that, where again, I do appreciate you complimenting me and appreciate our relationship, and just the full circle moment of, I remember you recording like on the bass, like the opening to the podcast and like the first few guests you had, to now, just, again, it doesn't seem like much time, but like, doing this for a little over 2 years, is something to kind of hang my hat on, of just feeling like this is a good start, and really kind of enjoying the path that I'm on, and just really looking forward to where it takes me as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm sure it's onward and upward. So on the personal front, you are getting married soon.
Yeah.
You've told me about Gabriella a number of times, but I just met her for the first time. She seems lovely. So what's the wedding plans? What's happening?
We're getting married in May. She's been handling a lot of the wedding planning, because she definitely wants it to be. She's kind of the opposite of me. Like, I'm like, we'll figure it out as we go. Like,
that's not the way you do weddings.
It's not how you do weddings.
That's not.
So she's very. We're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, I'm like, we can make plans day of for like anything. And she's like, we need to kind of know what we're doing and how to plan and how to prepare for a lot of things. And so it's a good balance. But wedding planning May of next year, so very soon, getting married, and really looking forward to that. And I know that was something that, again, just in the amount of time that we've known each other, that was where, she was my girlfriend at the time that we did supervision, and just kind of seeing the, movement there of me becoming, a better person and learning more about myself, how that shows up in the relationship as well. So it's exciting stuff.
Growth.
Yeah. The wedding's coming up. Before we know it, it's less than half a year away. So.
Well, that's really exciting, man. Congratulations on that. And I'm sure it's going to be, you guys are going to do wonderful in all that. And it's nice to see your personal life and your professional life coalescing into something that you probably wouldn't have thought was possible 3-4 years ago.
Definitely not. To be getting married and to be a private practice therapist in Boca Raton, I don't know that any of those adjectives ever would have crossed my mind. And it's kind of funny just seeing where it's going. But again, everything, to your point, it's funny when you say you seem happy, because I know that's something that most people probably wouldn't use to describe me, especially. I know a lot of, Russians have that Russian scowl at all times where they can't smile. And that was even something I remember my dad telling me when I was a kid, is that like your face, you can't smile. If you're smiling for no reason, something's wrong with you. And so I remember that lesson as like a 5-year-old, is like, you have to look tough at all times. You can't smile. And you see me in passing and I'm kind of smiling, walking around the lobby here. I think that shows just how different life has gone for me. So I appreciate that.
Let me say it differently. You seem pretty happy for you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. I think the men in my family have a little bit of that as well. And I have a little bit of like kind of a resting man, just like a resting grumpy face myself. And I remember one time when we were just at home, my wife, my son, and I, we would have this fun with our dogs, and Mom was Mommy Dog and Sam was Sammy Dog. And somehow or other, I got named Grumpy Dog. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, how come come I have to be grumpy dog? And every once in a while, especially as I'm doing the podcast and taking more pictures and videos of myself, you look and you see that sometimes the natural state of my regular look, it just looks kind of grumpy. It looks like I'm in distress. And I'm like, that's just my natural face looks like that. I gotta work on projecting maybe a little bit of a different energy at times. It looks very serious.
Right. Yeah. I think, again, that shows just why it made sense us working together, because I think it's one of those things where you're talking to a therapist and they're just kind of mean mugging you, brow furrowed. You're like, am I saying the wrong thing? Why does this guy look so angry at me right now? You're
like, you know what? Eric looks appropriately distressed. This might be the person I could work with.
Yeah, pretty much that was the ultimate deciding factor.
Looks like a guy who's got a lot on his mind. That's the guy. That's the guy. Well, Ben, thank you. Thank you for coming in and doing this. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad that you were able to make it. And again, I really appreciate the whole experience. And I reflect back on it fondly. I haven't worked with very many interns through supervision, but it is something that I do. But this experience that we had was it was special. So I appreciate it, and I'm really happy for you, everything that you've done and where you are now. It's exciting.
Cool. I appreciate that. I hopefully this is something where, I know you enjoyed the intern process, and I hope that more people find you, because again, I think to meet with you, it was definitely monumental for me and where I'm at. And then also, again, to sit down with you was just cool, and to just kind of talk about the process and the timeline and where things are going. I'm excited as well.
One time you and I went fishing with Michael Cardinal, and we stumbled onto your guys' secret spot, which I'm not going to reveal on the podcast, but where there are an unexpected area where there were a lot of peacock bass, and we got into some of them, and there's some big boys we were reeling up that day, and it was a lot of fun, and that was cool. And I always thought to myself, we should do that again.
Yeah.
Have you been fishing lately?
I haven't. I think when, work and then planning for the wedding and everything, it's just, I haven't. And so that's something that, here you go, you're kind of doing some therapy on me now. I have no excuse as to why I haven't been able to go fishing. It's something I need to do. I remember we did have a blast that day. We were catching some monsters that day. It's something I definitely need to get into again.
It's really not therapeutic, man. I'm just looking to go fishing with somebody. It's been a minute, and I need a little bit of a push, because but I'd like to get back out there.
Yeah, we'll have to put something on the calendar once we get through the holidays.
Yeah, I want to do the beach this time, and the mullet run is here with the good beach fishing. It's sort of short lived, but
yeah. No, we'll have to do something once we both find time.
Yeah. So we'll either that or we'll just do around here or something.
Yeah.
But that'll be fun. Well, all right, man. Hey, before we go, why don't you give how people can get in touch with you if they want to see you for therapy?
Yeah.
Management stuff,
Yeah. I think, the best way, I just, give my line out. So 561-871-0153, or if you just Google Ben Taratuta, there's not really many Ben Taratutas out there. It's pops up taratutacounseling.com, the website, and get in touch with me and be able to get something set up and scheduled.
So you have a website?
Yes.
That is searchable by Google?
Yes.
taratutacounseling.com. Okay, everybody. So if you want to work with Ben, anger management work, taratutacounseling.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, man.